From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of WisPolitics Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. I'm Abigail Levins. I'm here in the office with my colleague Kate Morton to talk about an interview she did with Marquette University's Law School poll director, Charles Franklin. Kate, want to tell us about the interview?
Yeah, so Charles and I talked a little bit about the political environment for 2026, what kind of big issues might come up, what he's seeing in polling, and we particularly focused on the dynamics in the governor's race coming up.
Great, let's get to the interview.
Well, thank you, Charles, for joining me on the podcast today. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Yeah. So I think to start off, I just want to talk about the overall landscape for polling in 2026. So could you talk a little bit about what kind of trends you're seeing in polling right now and how that could maybe have an impact in the upcoming elections?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to think about is that midterms are usually difficult for a sitting party of the party of the president's party. Um, Usually, in fact, almost always, that leads to losses of seats in the Congress, but it also usually leads to losses of seats in state legislatures around the country. And governors of the president's party are usually a little bit disadvantaged in midterm elections. So that's a long historical view that suggests at least a little bit of a lean towards the Democrats in 2026 or against the Republicans. However, whether those losses are large like they were for Obama in 2010, when they were truly massive at both the congressional and especially the state legislative level, um, or whether they're teeny tiny as they have been the last couple of midterms, or even as recently as the early 2000s, we saw actual small gains for the president's party. Um, so those gains are really rare, but small losses or big losses are common, and which it is going to hinge so much on the president's popularity and the direction of the country on big things like inflation, which were so important in the 2024 election, and whether people think the country has moved in the right direction under President Trump or whether it's moved in the wrong direction. So those things matter down at the governor's races and the legislative races as well as the congressional races. I'd also say, we're just about a year out, just slightly under a year out from the primaries in next August. And while that's not much time for campaigns to gear up, it's a long time for political conditions to shift.
Right.
So I don't think what we know right today about the president's popularity and inflation and what concerns people the most, those things could change a lot over the coming 12 months till the primary and then the following 3 months to election day.
Yeah, as far as the issues in polling right now, you mentioned inflation. Are there any other big ones that you're seeing that are really top of voters' minds right now?
Inflation is absolutely number one. It's running about 30 or 35%, saying that's their most important issue. And then the economy, more generally, is running about 15%. And so those two together give you half of the electorate saying they're worried about inflation and the economy as their top two issues. It's then a bit of a drop off to other things. And at the national level, one of those things, immigration, has fallen off into fourth place after being a bit higher than that in 2024. So there are some shifts there. But the thing that drove voters so much in 2024, inflation and the economy remain at the top of the list, and we're not seeing those things going away. In fact, in our polling, we're seeing concern for inflation rising over the coming year, hitting about 65% who think inflation will go up over the next 12 months. Only about 30 or 35% think it'll go down.
Yeah, so to talk a little bit about the governor's race that's going to be coming up, this will be the first open governor's race we've had since 2010. I'm wondering what that means for polling and what that will look like. What kind of dynamic should we expect to see?
I think the number one most important point is it means that all of the candidates will be virtually unknown statewide when they run. That includes someone like Josh Kaul, who holds the attorney generalship, has won two statewide races. And we have not polled a lot about him, but when we have polled, his name recognition is relatively low, lower than I think most people would imagine for a statewide elected official. But that's not about Kaul. That is absolutely normal that other than the governor and maybe the senators, most elected officials in the state have name recognition less than 50%, meaning more than 50% say when we ask them, do you have a favorable or an unfavorable view of this person? They go, I don't know enough about them to have an opinion. So across the parties, we're going to have to see the candidates who eventually are in the race working hard to build that fundamental name recognition, that fundamental connection with voters, that they at least feel like they've heard of that person and know enough about them to just have a general positive or negative feeling. We're not saying they need to tick off 12 talking points that that candidate likes to cover. Just have a sense of whether you like this person or don't like this person, and getting to the point where you don't go, who? Or I don't know enough about that person. And the thing that I think will come up in our polling for the next year leading into the primary is that looking back since we started the Marquette poll in 2012, looking at all of the non-incumbent candidates over that period, they start out with name recognition in the 10 to 20% range, meaning just 10 to 20% say they have an opinion about this person. Tony Evers started the race at 15%. And most of the gains don't come until the last month before the primary. So we will see a tremendous amount of campaigning and increasing amount of advertising over next winter and spring for sure, and early summer. But judging from the past, their name recognition numbers are still not likely to move a whole lot in April, May, June. It'll only be in that period from July to August that we see a significant uptick, especially for the winners, who usually, but not always, usually are the best known people.
Mhm.
So that's the number one challenge over the coming months for the, I think, three declared candidates at this point, and no doubt we will have more soon
Yeah.
who've officially gotten in the race. Um, and I guess internally, the campaigns have to not feel discouraged that people still don't know them after 3 months, 5 months of driving all over this state.
Right.
Um, but to look to that last month of the campaign as the sprint to the finish, it is a marathon overall. You're going to spend a lot of time going to party meetings, meeting individual voters around the state. But when you start to see the real payoff with the mass public from that, it only comes late in the campaign, both when your advertising ramps up a lot, but also when voters finally begin to tune into the fact that there is a primary and they have a choice to make early in August.
Yeah, one thing I was curious to ask about, Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez, she's a Dem who's declared her candidacy. We're still kind of parsing out the field at this point, but I was just wondering, it was kind of seen as Evers having this incumbent advantage if he had wanted to run again. Do
Yes.
you think any of that rubs off on Rodriguez, or will it still be a challenge for her in the beginning, this name
I,
idea?
this name recognition will be a challenge for her, and we have an example of that, Mandela Barnes, when he ran for the Senate. His name, as lieutenant governor, as Evers' lieutenant governor, his name recognition was equally low, even though he was the sitting lieutenant governor at the beginning of the Senate race. Now, of course, for all of these candidates, once they win the primary, voters will know who they are, and that will be true as we go into election day in November. But it's this period of how do you get well enough known to win that primary in the first place? That's a challenge. And maybe there's some advantage of being able to say, "Hi, I'm Sarah Rodriguez. Your lieutenant governor." That
Mhm.
at least gives people something to hang on to as who is this person? In the same way that, we see Bill Berrien, I'm a businessman, or Josh Schoeman, I'm a county executive. So people to hang those titles on themselves in part to establish who they are to voters in just a simple little phrase. So to that extent, I think being lieutenant governor is a plus. The negative of the lieutenant governor is that the criticisms that Republicans would have weighed in on against Tony Evers, they will certainly try to transfer in part to Rodriguez.
Mhm.
We'll see how effective that is or how much they focus on that. But there is an element of being tied to an incumbent. Now, Evers is relatively popular. His job approval has stayed above 50% in the vast majority of our polls over the years and slipped to 48% in the June poll, but it was still net positive. His disapproval was 46%. Um, so I think Evers doesn't leave the office as an unpopular governor and therefore doesn't leave a lot of burden on his successor, whoever that might be.
Yeah. What about on the Republican side? We've got Josh Schoeman, Bill Berrien, who have declared their candidacy. Where does their name ID stand? How do you
Yeah.
think they're being received at this point?
We haven't polled on either of them, but for comparison, we did ask about Tom Tiffany, congressman from the 7th District, who is
Mhm.
not announced but teases the possibility of running. When we asked about him in June of 2023, when he was also thinking about running for the Senate, 75% did not know enough to have an opinion of him. Only 25% recognized his name and had either a positive or negative feeling. And that's a sitting U.S. congressman.
Mhm.
So I think without having polled on either Schoeman or Berrien, I think we're very confident that their name recognition will be even lower than that. Now, the interesting thing is Berrien has started running television advertising this early. One presumes that's to try to build some of that name recognition. Um, and I think it's an open question whether early advertising really can get your foot in the door, get people to be a little more familiar with your name, or whether really it's a waste of money because people don't tune in until 9 months, 10 months, 11 months from now. That's what I've been talking about, that we see the rise in name recognition only late in the primary campaign. So it's not clear that early money is really an advantage here. However, I don't run campaigns and I don't advise people how to run campaigns. My last successful race was for third grade class president. Uh, and so, campaigns are going to make their own decisions about how to spend their money and when. But I just am reporting the numbers that we've seen over these last 14 years that even well-known candidates, relatively speaking, don't gain very much. So,
Yeah, well, before we wrap it up, I'm wondering, as you do start doing polling in the this governor's race,
yeah,
what do you think are some key things that people who are reading these polls should know and keep in mind?
yeah. Well, certainly we will start getting name ID and favorability to the candidates starting in October with our next statewide poll. But at least at the moment, I don't anticipate doing much horse race polling early on, simply because when so few people know these candidates, asking them to choose between candidate A that they haven't heard of and candidate B that they haven't heard of and candidate C that they haven't heard of is kind of a waste of time. So I expect we won't focus on the horse race until late in the spring or early summer for
Hmm.
the primary and then looking ahead to November. Because at that point, maybe their name ID will have gone up enough to make that more reasonable. I'll be more interested in focusing on what the issues are.
Mm.
How do people feel about the state right now? We know that right direction, wrong track has shown more people saying wrong track for the last 8 or 9 years at least. It's gone on for a long time. People thinking we're headed in the wrong direction, on the wrong track. Um, but that had improved some over the last year. Still net negative, but not as negative as it was. What do people think about taxes? About whether inflation is a big issue for them here in the state? And what are the issues they want the candidates to be talking about? If we think of some of the past races in 2010, Scott Walker talked a lot about job creation and attracting industry to the state. I don't think we've heard candidates from either party spending a lot of time on that kind of issue. Um, there's been broad ideological topics raised, issues of um, concealed carry have just come up in the last few days. Um, but and schools are certainly something that we hear a lot of talk about. But I'll be focusing on those sorts of issues that are likely to be important no matter who the nominees are. Where are the candidates, where are the voters on what issues they want to hear about, they want candidates to be talking about, rather than asking them about candidates that they don't know much about. Now, again, that'll change as we go across the year, as those candidates get better known and as events happen. Um, so I guess what I'm saying is, let's first find out who they know and whether they like or dislike them, and then watch how that builds over the next 6 or 8 months.
Great. Well, thank you, Charles, for sharing this with us, and we'll be watching to see how these polls kind of evolve over time.
Thank you. My pleasure. And yes, we will indeed be seeing a lot of that. Don't forget, we have a Supreme Court race in there too.
Oh, yeah.
It'll be a busy year, even though we only have the Supreme Court and the governor's race next year, plus the whole legislature, of course.
Thanks everyone for listening to this episode of WIS Politics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum. If you want to learn more about the governor's race and other races coming up in 2026, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. For now, I'm Abigail Evans.
I'm Kate Morton.
And thank you for listening.